Let's jump into a brand new deep dive. Today we're heading north of the border into Canada. Specifically, we're checking out two Ontario spots, Oakville and Toronto. Using their Wikipedia pages, we'll uncover some interesting nuggets. Whether you're a potential visitor, a future resident, or just a geography enthusiast, this one's for you.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how these two places in the same province offer such different looks at Canadian life. Oakville's got that small town charm while still being pretty big. Toronto's a straight up global heavyweight.
And that's what caught my eye right off the bat. Oakville is officially a town, but its population's over 200,000. That's bigger than a lot of cities I can think of. What's the story there? Why has it stayed a town?
I think some of that goes back to its roots. Oakville was founded way back in 1827 by a shipbuilder. And get this, it also had a history as a major basket-making center. So you've got this sense of craftsmanship and community right from the start that seems to have stuck around even as Oakville's grown.
Basket making. Now that's not something you hear every day, especially for a town known for being pretty affluent. I wonder if any of that heritage is still visible today. Maybe in local artisan shops or something.
It's a good thought. Often those traditional crafts find new ways to live on. And speaking of evolution, Oakville has really shifted gears economically. It used to be all about oil refineries, but now it's home to Ford Motor Company's Canadian headquarters.
That's a pretty dramatic change.
Yeah.
How did that transition even happen? Did the town specifically try to attract businesses like Ford, or was it more of a natural progression?
Probably a bit of both, I'd say. But what's clear is that Oakville's managed to bring in diverse industries without losing that town feeling. And the diversity goes beyond industry. Over a third of its residents don't speak English as their first language.
Wow, that's a lot higher than I would have guessed. It really shows Oakville's appeal on a global scale. We're seeing this mix of history, modern industry, and cultural depth already.
Yeah, it's a blend a lot of towns would love to have. And it's all set against the backdrop of these distinct neighborhoods. The historic Old Oakville, the charming Kerr Village, and Bronte right by the lake. No wonder people are drawn to it.
All right, let's zoom out now and look at Toronto. Just picturing the skyline tells you it's in a different league entirely. Canada's biggest city, a global financial hub, a cultural hotspot. Where do we even begin with this one?
I think a good place to start is actually the name Toronto itself. It comes from the indigenous word Toronto, a reminder that long before the skyscrapers and financial markets, this land had a whole different meaning.
That's a good point. We often forget about the layers of history beneath what we see today. And speaking of history, the War of 1812 really left its mark on the city, didn't it? Back then it was still called York, and it was captured and plundered by American troops.
That's right. It was a devastating event, but also a turning point. It forced the British to rethink their defenses, and in a way fueled the city's determination to grow and fortify itself.
So it's like that experience lit a fire under them. And grow, it did. Throughout the 19th century, Toronto expanded rapidly. And then in 1998, it went through this huge amalgamation, merging several municipalities to form the megacity we know today. I imagine that wasn't without controversy.
Amalgamation is always a complex process. You're bringing together different communities, different systems, different ways of life. But it did lay the foundation for the unified and efficient city that Toronto is today.
Okay, so we've got this image of a city with deep roots, a drive to overcome obstacles, and a knack for reinventing itself. But let's move beyond the history books for a second and talk about what it's actually like to be in Toronto. What strikes me is the geography. It's this flat plain, but then you've got these ravines cut by rivers and creeks. It's not the typical picture you get when you think big city, right?
The really interesting thing about those ravines is how they've shaped the city's development. Imagine streets just suddenly stopping at a ravine's edge and then picking up again on the other side. It creates this almost hidden network, a reminder that nature's still there, even in all the concrete.
I'm picturing myself walking down one of those streets and then bam, this sudden drop-off. It must be quite a sight. Speaking of the landscape, I read that landfill has significantly changed Toronto's lakeshore over time. What did that original shoreline look like? What impact did those changes have?
That's a question cities all over the world are grappling with, how to balance development with environmental protection. It's a delicate dance, and Toronto's story is a prime example of that ongoing conversation between progress and nature.
And then there's the weather. Toronto's known for its 4 distinct seasons, but I've heard it's also seen some pretty wild temperature extremes over the years. It makes you realize that even in a generally temperate climate, you're not immune to nature's power.
Right. It's a reminder that climate change is a global reality, and cities like Toronto are on the front lines of adapting to its unpredictable effects. But speaking of unpredictable, there's another chapter in Toronto's story that really shook things up globally. In 2003, it became the epicenter of the SARS outbreak.
That must have been a terrifying time for the city. It's hard to imagine being in the middle of a global health crisis unfolding right in your own backyard.
It was a defining moment, not just for Toronto, but for the whole world. It showed how interconnected global health really is and how important preparedness is. But it also showed the resilience of people and the power of community when things get tough.
I'm curious about the long-term effects of that experience. Did it lead to any lasting changes in how Toronto approaches public health and emergency preparedness?
Oh, absolutely. It led to major investments in public health infrastructure, better communication and coordination between different levels of government, and a greater awareness of the need for international collaboration when it comes to health threats. The SARS outbreak was a wake-up call, and Toronto came out of it stronger and more prepared.
That's good to hear. It's a reminder that even from the darkest times, we can learn and grow. And speaking of growth, Toronto's known for its amazing public transit system. How does it manage to move millions of people around such a sprawling city every day?
Well, its public transit network is truly a marvel of engineering and logistics. The city has buses, streetcars, subways, and it's got the third highest ridership in all of North America. It shows the city's commitment to sustainable transportation and how important they know a good transit system is for a thriving metropolis.
So we got this picture of a city shaped by history, geography, and even global health events. It's a place that clearly embraces change and innovation, but it's also a city that knows how to have fun, right? Toronto's cultural scene is legendary, and I'm ready to dive into what makes it so vibrant.
Well, get ready for a whirlwind tour because Toronto's cultural landscape is just as diverse and dynamic as the city itself. From huge events like the Caravana Festival and Pride Week, which attract millions of visitors, to its thriving arts and theater scene, there's something for everyone.
We've been talking about these big citywide events, but what about Oakville's cultural scene? Does it have that same energy, or is it more of a quieter, more community-focused vibe?
You know, I think Oakville strikes a nice balance. It has its share of festivals and events that bring people together. But there's also a strong emphasis on local talent and community involvement. For example, the Downtown Oakville Jazz Festival is a popular summer event with performances along Lakeshore Road.
Jazz by the lake. That sounds pretty awesome. It seems like Oakville's found a way to keep that small-town charm while still offering some of those bigger cultural experiences.
Yeah.
What about its art scene? Are there places where local artists can showcase their work?
Oh, for sure. The Oakville Center for the Performing Arts hosts all sorts of shows and events throughout the year. And the Oakville Children's Choir has been a beloved institution since 1994. And for those who are into visual arts, there are the Oakville Galleries. It's a nonprofit museum with 2 locations that focus on contemporary art.
It's interesting. You mentioned Oakville's history as a shipbuilding and basket-making center earlier. I wonder if any of those traditional crafts have made their way into the modern art scene. Maybe there are artists incorporating those old techniques or materials into their work.
That's a really interesting thought. It wouldn't be surprising at all to see those historical influences pop up in the contemporary art scene. After all, art often reflects a community's heritage and identity.
Now, before we move on from Oakville, is there anything else that surprised you about the town? Any hidden gems or unexpected facts that stood out?
One thing that caught my attention was Oakville's connection to the oil refining industry. Both cities service Canada, which later became BP Canada and is now Petro-Canada, and Shell Canada had refineries there. It's a reminder that even places known for their affluence and tranquility have gone through their industrial phases.
Huh. That's a fascinating little tidbit. It speaks to how towns and cities are always evolving. Okay, let's shift our focus back to Toronto and dive into its multicultural makeup. We've talked about its diverse population, but I'm curious about the specific ethnic groups that call the city home.
Toronto's diversity is truly remarkable. According to the 2016 census, the most common ethnic origins reported were English, Canadian, Scottish, Irish, Italian, German, Chinese, French, East Indian, and Polish. But those are just the top 10. Over 200 ethnic origins are represented in the city. It's like a microcosm of the world.
That's incredible. Just walking down the street in Toronto must feel like taking a trip around the globe. You mentioned distinct neighborhoods like Chinatown, Little Italy, and Greektown. Do these communities mainly consist of people from those specific backgrounds, or is there more of a mixing of cultures?
While those neighborhoods are named for their historical ties to certain cultures, they've evolved into these vibrant melting pots. You'll find Italian restaurants right next to Chinese bakeries, Greek tavernas across the street from Indian spice shops. It's this fusion of cultures that makes Toronto so unique and exciting.
And with so many languages spoken, I wonder how the city handles communication. Are there services available for those who don't speak English?
Toronto is incredibly accommodating to its diverse linguistic landscape. Over 160 languages are spoken in the city, and less than half of residents speak English as their mother tongue. You'll find multilingual signage translation services and community organizations dedicated to helping newcomers integrate into society.
It sounds like Toronto has really embraced its multilingual identity. I can only imagine what a rich and vibrant soundscape that creates. Now, to understand the present, it's always helpful to look back at the past. What were some of the major historical turning points that shaped Toronto into the city it is today?
We already talked about the War of 1812, but another key period was the late 19th century. Toronto experienced rapid industrial growth then. It became a major transportation hub with the construction of railway lines and the expansion of its port facilities. This attracted a wave of immigrants seeking new opportunities, and industries like manufacturing, meatpacking, and alcohol distillation boomed.
The Gooderham Wurtz distillery comes to mind. It was once the largest whiskey factory in the world, and now it's been transformed into the distillery district. It's a popular spot for tourists and a center for arts and culture. It's fascinating how the city has repurposed these old industrial spaces.
It really shows Toronto's commitment to preserving its heritage while embracing the future. The Distillery District is a great example of how the city has successfully turned its industrial past into a vibrant cultural asset.
Okay, let's fast forward to the 20th century. What were some of the developments that set the stage for Toronto's transformation into a megacity?
During the 20th century, Toronto's boundaries expanded through annexation, and in 1954 emerged with 12 surrounding municipalities to form metropolitan Toronto, kind of a precursor to the megacity we know today. It was a time of major growth and change as the city grappled with accommodating a rapidly growing population and evolving infrastructure needs.
So the idea of a megacity had been brewing for decades before it actually happened. It makes you think about what challenges and opportunities those early mergers presented. Did they face resistance from communities that were being incorporated, or was there a shared vision for the future?
Like with any major urban transformation, there were definitely growing pains and different viewpoints. Some communities embraced the merger. They saw it as a chance for more resources and collaboration. While others were worried about losing their local identity and autonomy, it's a reminder that city building is a complex process that involves constant negotiation and compromise.
And that process didn't stop with the creation of Metropolitan Toronto. In 1998, the 6 municipalities that made up Metropolitan Toronto were amalgamated to create the current city of Toronto. I remember that being pretty controversial at the time. What were the reasons behind that decision, and what were some of the long-term effects?
The main goals of the amalgamation were to simplify governance, cut down on bureaucracy, and create a more unified and efficient city. It was also seen as a way to address inequality between the different municipalities, making sure all residents had access to the same level of services and opportunities. However, the amalgamation also got some criticism for potentially weakening local representation and creating a more centralized and less responsive government.
It seems like the debate over amalgamation is still going on today. It just goes to show that there's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to managing large and complex urban areas. But despite these challenges, Toronto has become a global leader in many ways. I'm interested in exploring what's driving its economic success and how it's balancing growth with sustainability.
Well, get ready to be impressed because Toronto's economy is booming. The city has a remarkably diverse economy with strengths in finance, technology, media, healthcare, education, and tourism. Its reputation as a global center for innovation and culture keeps attracting talent and investment from all over the world.
Let's start with finance. Toronto's financial district, centered around Bay Street, is often called Canada's Wall Street. What are some of the key players that make up this financial powerhouse?
Bay Street is home to the headquarters of all 5 of Canada's biggest banks: Royal Bank of Canada, Toronto-Dominion Bank, Scotiabank, Bank of Montreal, and Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. And it's not just Canadian finance either. Toronto has also attracted a lot of major international banks and financial institutions, making it a real global player.
That's a lot of financial power concentrated in one place. It speaks to Toronto's stability and appeal as a place to do business. But it's not just about the big banks, is it? What about smaller financial institutions and fintech startups? Is Toronto a hub for those too?
Absolutely. Toronto has a thriving fintech scene with tons of startups and incubators working on innovative financial technologies and solutions. The city's strong tech infrastructure, access to capital, and supportive regulatory environment make it a magnet for fintech entrepreneurs.
It's great to see Toronto embracing the future of finance while holding on to his position as a traditional financial center. But it's not all about the money, is it? What other industries are contributing to Toronto's economic success?
One of Toronto's greatest strengths is its economic diversity. Beyond finance, the city has a booming tech sector with more and more tech companies setting up shop there. It's also a major hub for media and entertainment with a thriving film and television production industry. And let's not forget about healthcare, education, and tourism, all of which play a big role in the city's economic vitality.
It sounds like Toronto has managed to build this dynamic ecosystem where different industries can flourish and support each other. But with all this economic activity, there must be some challenges too. What are some of the issues facing Toronto's economy?
One of the biggest challenges facing Toronto, like many other major cities around the world, is affordability. The cost of living, especially housing, has been going up, making it tough for some residents to keep up. It's a complicated issue with no easy answers. It's about finding the right balance between economic growth and making sure the city is accessible to people from all walks of life.
It's a tough balancing act for sure, and one that requires thoughtful urban planning and policy decisions. But let's change gears for a minute and talk about what makes Toronto such a great place to live beyond just the job opportunities. We've touched on its cultural scene, but I'd love to explore that a bit more. What makes it so vibrant and appealing?
Toronto's cultural scene is a direct reflection of the city's diverse population and its love for creativity and expression. It's got world-class museums, art galleries, theaters, and music venues offering something for everyone.
The Royal Ontario Museum and the Art Gallery of Ontario immediately come to mind. They're institutions that not only showcase art and culture, but also act as centers for education and community engagement.
Exactly. And for those who love the performing arts, there's the Four Seasons Centre for the Performing Arts, which is home to the Canadian Opera Company and the National Ballet of Canada. And let's not forget the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, one of the best in the world.
It's amazing to think about all the talented artists who have performed on those stages. But Toronto's cultural scene isn't just about high-end experiences. It's also about the lively street culture, the independent theaters, the local music venues, and all the festivals and events that happen year-round.
You got it. Toronto's cultural scene is like a tapestry made up of countless threads from the grand to the everyday. It's a city that celebrates both its heritage and its modern creative spirit. There's something for everyone.
And let's not forget about sports. Toronto is a city that loves its teams. It's got a rich sporting history.
Oh, absolutely. Toronto is a passionate sports town. The Toronto Maple Leafs, despite their Stanley Cup drought, hold a special place in the hearts of many Torontonians. And then there are the Toronto Blue Jays, who won back-to-back World Series titles in the early 90s. The city went wild.
And we can't leave out the Toronto Raptors, who captured the hearts of the entire country and the world when they won their historic NBA championship in 2019.
That was a truly magical time for the city. The Raptors' victory went beyond sports. It brought people together from all walks of life and showed off Toronto's spirit and resilience.
It seems like Toronto has a way of creating these moments that unite its diverse population, whether it's through sports, cultural events, or even shared challenges. But as we wrap up our look at Toronto, I'm curious to look ahead. What are some of the challenges and opportunities on the horizon for this dynamic city?
One of the biggest challenges facing Toronto, as we touched on earlier, is managing its rapid growth. The city is expected to keep attracting new residents, which will put pressure on infrastructure, housing, and resources. It's a balancing act that requires careful planning and investment to ensure Toronto stays livable and sustainable for everyone.
So sustainable growth is a key issue for Toronto's future. What are some of the things being done to address this challenge?
Toronto has been pretty proactive in its approach to sustainable development. The city's implemented a number of initiatives to reduce its carbon footprint, promote public transit, and create more affordable housing options. It's also investing in green infrastructure like parks and green spaces to improve air quality and make the city more livable overall.
It's encouraging to see a city taking real steps toward a more sustainable future. But beyond environmental sustainability, what about social and economic sustainability? How is Toronto working to ensure that all its residents have the chance to thrive and contribute to the city's success?
Toronto understands that true sustainability includes social and economic well-being. The city is focused on creating opportunities for all residents no matter their background or income level. This means investing in education and job training programs, supporting affordable housing initiatives, and promoting social inclusion and equity.
It sounds like Toronto is taking a holistic approach to sustainability, recognizing that a successful city is one that's not just environmentally responsible, but also socially just and economically inclusive.
You nailed it. And it's this dedication to building a better future for everyone that makes Toronto such an exciting and inspiring city.
Wow, it feels like we've just scratched the surface of these two cities. But I think we've gotten a good feel for their personalities. Oakville with its laid-back atmosphere and Toronto with its constant energy. It's amazing how two places so close together can feel so different.
Yeah, it really highlights the diversity you find within Ontario itself. You can have these pockets of almost rural peacefulness right next to a bustling metropolis, and each one offers something special.
When I think back to Oakville, what stands out is how it's managed to keep that small town identity while still attracting big companies like Ford. That seems like a tough thing to pull off.
It definitely is, and I think it shows a real effort from the town's leaders to put community and quality of life first alongside economic growth.
Mhm.
You know, things like preserving those historic neighborhoods, investing in arts and culture, fostering a strong sense of community. All of that contributes to what makes Oakville so appealing.
It makes you wonder if other towns could learn something from Oakville's approach, especially as more and more people are looking for that lifestyle that blends the best of both worlds. The peacefulness of a smaller community with the conveniences and opportunities of a bigger city.
I think so. Oakville's story is a good reminder that growth doesn't have to mean sacrificing character and community. It's about finding that sweet spot where economic development and quality of life work together.
Now, turning back to Toronto, I'm still trying to process everything we've learned about its history, its multiculturalism, its economic power, and its commitment to sustainability. It
Yeah.
feels like a city that's always pushing the limits and redefining what it means to be a global city.
Oh, Toronto is definitely a city that embraces change and innovation. It's not afraid to try new things, to take risks, to challenge the way things are done. And that's what makes it so dynamic and exciting.
And a little bit intimidating, to be honest. It's a lot to take in.
Hmm.
But I'm also picking up on this underlying sense of resilience and community spirit that seems to connect everything.
That's a sharp observation. Toronto has definitely had its fair share of challenges over the years: economic downturn, social unrest, even a global pandemic. But it always seems to bounce back stronger, more united, more determined to build a better future.
Thinking back to those challenges, especially the SARS outbreak, it's impressive how the city came out of that experience with a renewed focus on public health and emergency preparedness. It's a reminder that sometimes the toughest times can lead to the most significant changes.
Absolutely. It shows how adaptable and innovative people can be when faced with difficult situations. And it highlights the importance of learning from our mistakes and using those lessons to create a more resilient and prepared future.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into these two amazing Ontario cities, I'm left with a sense of optimism and possibility. Oakville with its quiet charm and community focus, and Toronto with its global ambitions and unwavering spirit offer two very different but equally compelling views of Canadian life. It's inspiring to see how they're shaping the future each in their own way.
It's a good reminder that there's no single right way to build a thriving city. It's about finding the right balance for the community, embracing diversity and encouraging innovation and collaboration. Oakville and Toronto, even though they're different in many ways, both embody these principles, and that's what makes them such interesting examples to look at.
It makes you wonder what the future holds for them. Will Oakville be able to maintain that balance between growth and preserving its small-town feel? Will Toronto keep its position as a global leader in the face of all the challenges that are constantly changing?
Only time will tell. But one thing's for certain. Both Oakville and Toronto are cities worth keeping an eye on. They're at the cutting edge of urban innovation, cultural development, and social progress. And they're sure to keep influencing the landscape of Ontario and maybe even all of Canada for many years to come.
Well said. This deep dive has definitely made me even more curious about these cities, and I'm sure it's done the same for you listening out there. We encourage you to keep exploring, to visit these cities if you get the chance, and to keep uncovering all those hidden gems and untold stories that make them so special.
There's always something new to learn, something new to discover, and something new to appreciate about these dynamic and ever-changing urban centers.
And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into Oakville and Toronto. We hope you enjoyed this journey as much as we did. Until next time, keep your curiosity alive, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.